Whoops, I'm sorry, I'm muted. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Chris Olszek. I'm the guy who puts these things together, and along with other folks. And we're now at the final session of the 2022 Civil Affairs Symposium, and this is as important a part of it as everything else, and that is the presentation of our civil affairs issue papers in response to the call for papers, which usually goes out in June. And we get the papers and then we decide upon them between September. We get them in September, we decide upon them in October. And then they are presented in November, and our final edits are done between November and December when we send the IM of the issue papers, which will include the symposium report, but we'll also post that separately. And that will be published sometime in February in electronic format, at least, and then probably on later in March in printed format. However, because we do send those out, but if you want a copy of that, you can always email a request to the Civil Affairs Association. And in fact, you can do that right now for any of the back issues. If there are issues left, on a printed copy of it, welcome to send request to the Civil Affairs Association email. The ninth volume is currently under construction. This is a very we'll listen to the General Bingham is the issue papers committee chairman, and he's the host. He'll take over this in a minute. We will have the issue papers presented, and then at the end you'll see the little icon down below, the polls. It says select your favorite paper, and you'll vote only one. This is not, they call that weighted voting or whatever they call that. You get only one choice. So you can choose your best paper, and then that'll be rolled up, and then we'll be able to provide you immediate feedback when the polls are closed, which they will in a matter of minutes. And we'll tell you who won. First prize is a $1,000 cash prize, and second is $500, and third is $200. For some people, at least, there's quite a bit. So we hope you listen attentively and cast your ballots appropriately. And I will now direct you to the screen, and General Bingham will take over. Meanwhile, I am posting the issue paper summaries in the chat room, and I'm just about done with that. When I get done with that, you can take a look at the paper summaries, then, so you get an idea what presenters are. Over to you, General.
Hey, thank you, Chris. I'd like to start by thanking the Papers Review Committee. Am I on the screen?
Yes, you are, sir.
Okay, great. Helping on the screen and with screening and selecting the papers, retired Major General Mike Keir, retired Colonels Chris Olszek, Larry Rubini, Mike Cleary, and Joe Kirlin. We also had Colonels Carolyn Pogge from the Army side and Len DeFrancisi from the Marine Corps side. And also we had Dennis Cahill representing, of course, the center of the universe. A total of 10 papers were submitted, and the committee picked 5 to present here. One of the authors, John McLaughlin, is deployed downrange, so he will not be able to compete here today, but his paper will be published, and his paper was on social science and how that influences CA. Please don't forget to stay tuned for all of the presentations where you will be asked to vote, because each of the presenters have put a lot of time and effort, and we want to make sure that they get appropriately recognized. It's almost like we bootlegged copies of the issue papers to Brigadier General Beaupere, as he touched yesterday many of the topics that you're going to hear today. We'll cover multi-compo training, malicious artificial intelligence, governance, and strategic support of the GCCs. Our first presenter, Captain Moriarty, is focusing on developing civil affairs capabilities in civil resistance at a level that's comparable to what the special forces are able to do in supporting guerrillas during unconventional warfare. Captain Moriarty is going to provide some historical examples and CA's role in supporting civil resistance and how to get there. So Captain Moriarty, come off mute and go for it, please.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Let me just get the screen set up. All right. All right, so everyone should be able to see my presentation. Okay, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Captain Danny Moriarty, and I'm currently in the second year of my master's program at the University of Texas at Austin, following which I'll be assigned to the U.S. Military Academy as an instructor in the Department of Geography and Environmental Engineering. My research is focused on the use of digital media by the civil resistance movements, so I'm very honored to have the opportunity to present to you my issue paper, The Power of the People, Civil Affairs, and Civil Resistance. To begin, my overarching argument is that civil affairs and the rest of SOF needs to give nonviolent or civil resistance its due credit as a viable mechanism to pursue U.S. national security objectives, and accordingly should become subject matter experts in the field. To connect to the association's prompt for this year's issue papers, civil resistance represents an effective way for CA to win without fighting, and in doing so will enable victory before war through a dynamic approach to integrated deterrence. Just to set some context for this topic, I think it's safe to say that we're living in a time with very complex operating environments. At one end, we have the ongoing large-scale conflict in Ukraine and potential for similar conflict over Taiwan, and at the other, the U.S. continues to compete against revisionist powers for global influence. In most of these situations, resistance efforts are either actively ongoing or being planned for. The problem, I argue, is that current frameworks of resistance are becoming outdated, prioritizing the images of armed guerrillas with external support waging a violent campaign. Documents such as the resistance operating concept and other pieces of doctrine support this with a noted marginalization of the public component. But nonviolent or civil resistance movements have just as much capability to defeat or disrupt an adversary, and therefore deserve special attention from both civil affairs and SOF. In my paper, I've summarized civil resistance campaigns under three categories, discussing historical examples of each. The first is what scholars of the field refer to as maximalist campaigns. These were large-scale campaigns seeking to fundamentally change the status quo of a state. Examples include Gandhi's Indian independence movement, the U.S. Civil Rights Movement, Nelson Mandela's anti-apartheid movement, and the Opol resistance in Serbia that led to the downfall of Slobodan Milosevic. The second category includes civil resistance campaigns that are waged along a parallel armed component, typically seen during times of military occupation. As we've seen, the Ukrainian people have been demonstrating this since the beginning of the war, with a variety of nonviolent tactics being used to undercut Russian political objectives and disrupt military operations. For example, the withdrawal of civil servants and teachers from their positions in occupied cities have repudiated Russian claims of grassroots support and prevented an easy political consolidation. Lastly, I have everyday resistance and smaller scale social movements as a notable third category. This somewhat catch-all includes social movements like the 2014 and 2019 Hong Kong protests that garnered much international attention, but also many movements that often go unnoticed. Organized labor movements in the US, for example, frequently use resistance tactics like strikes and boycotts to achieve their objectives. Moving beyond the history and types of civil resistance campaigns to ensure that present some of the foundational on its advantages. While there has been some debate over the context in which civil resistance is advantageous to violent resistance, the works of scholars like Erica Chenoweth, Maria Stefan, and Peter Ackerman remain relevant. Civil resistance, on average, has proven to be more effective than violent campaigns in achieving movement objectives. And even though movements using these tactics have seen a drop in success rates over the past decade, as seen in this graph from 2021, it remains more effective than violent movements. So why is this? Broadly, civil resistance movements benefit a much higher number of supporters due to a lower barrier of entry. Far more people in a given society will find it easier to march or go on strike than to pick up a rifle and try to kill another human being. Related to this is that civil resistance movements will have a much more diverse group of participants. As opposed to the largely military-age male-dominated armed organizations, Nonviolent organizations often welcome and encourage the participation and leadership of people from many different walks of life. This directly leads to the other main mechanism of its advantage, the backfire effect of adversary violence. When nonviolent demonstrators are more reflective of a given society, security forces will typically have a harder time using violence against a movement than against an armed insurgent or guerrilla force. The other side of this is that when violence is used against a civil resistance movement, the political effects will almost always work against the adversary. For example, one of the strategies of the U.S. Civil Rights Movement was to train and enforce nonviolent discipline, as the leaders correctly knew that images of white police and mobs attacking nonviolent protesters would generate large amounts of public sympathy and support for the cause. Taking a step down from its academic underpinnings, I propose vignettes of what civil resistance would look like across the context of large-scale combat operations, irregular warfare, and great power competition. Within large-scale combat operations, a lot of what I propose is essentially what the people of Ukraine are already doing. This includes some of the acts discussed earlier that undercut adversary political objectives, but also actions that, while nonviolent, are entirely confrontational, such as reporting enemy troop positions and movements to armed elements, and certain acts of sabotage. For example, early in the conflict, several railway workers in Belarus used their technical training to disrupt and slow the movement of Russian equipment to staging areas in their country. In irregular warfare, the maximalist campaigns represent how civil resistance could be used to disrupt an adversary, whether as a standalone campaign or as a supporting effort to an armed unconventional warfare effort. Much of the existing doctrinal discussion of nonviolent resistance uses this lens, but to be sure, nonviolent campaigns, like the historical examples presented, can achieve all the same objectives on their own. Lastly, and perhaps most controversially, I argue that civil resistance could serve as another way for the U.S. to compete against powers like China. Across the world, we're still seeing high levels of Chinese investment and extractivism, and this is not without political consequence. Recent research has shown that sites of Chinese economic activity in Africa are far more likely to be the sites of protests or strikes than those of other states. Similar to the labor movements mentioned earlier, smaller campaigns targeting these or similar sites of economic or political influence can create new dilemmas and force our adversaries to expend additional resources. So then, what would CA support to civil resistance look like? I argue that an important element to this would be a continuation of effective civil reconnaissance already being performed by CA forces across the world, but with the important lens of civil resistance. Observing vulnerabilities and networks through this frame will help generate options for U.S. forces and assist in the operational design process. Beyond CR, specific engagements with indigenous people and institutions focused on training and the skills of civil resistance would serve to strengthen the capabilities of future campaigns. Recent research by scholars in the field has argued that the most effective form of external support to nonviolent campaigns is in capacity building or training efforts delivered before the period of peak mobilization. An example of this was seen in Serbia, when retired Special Forces Colonel Robert Helvey, working for pro-democracy NGOs, organized workshops on civil resistance planning with leaders of the Otpor movement in neighboring Hungary. This also brings me to an important point that bears further discussion. Many people's popular conception of nonviolent resistance is centered on marches and protests that are relatively impromptu or crowdsourced. While the proliferation of social media has made these large leaderless protests easier to coordinate, truly effective resistance movements hinge on a backbone of trained and dedicated leaders and organizers. To paraphrase author Tom Ricks in his new military history of the U.S. Civil Rights Movement, these protests and sit-ins and marches don't just happen. To the right, we can see one small example of this. Before any activist sat down at a Nashville lunch counter, organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, ran a series of intense training workshops on nonviolent discipline. Just as any military organization uses rigorous training to develop an effective fighting force, so too did the organizations of the Civil Rights Movement spend weeks and months preparing the supporters for the tense confrontation with the force of segregation. One SNCC member recalled the experience saying, quote, "We had a nonviolent academy equivalent to West Point. We knew how to organize a community, how to negotiate. We were warriors." Bringing it back to the goal of this presentation, developing and implementing training programs on these fundamentals would represent one of several ways to support civil resistance. Lastly, I want to address just a few of the limitations of supporting these types of movements. For one, doing so may require organizational humility, understanding that truly effective grassroots movements may not accept efforts by a third party to steer or control a campaign. Second, U.S. support to social movements or resistance runs the risk of supporting claims by adversaries of U.S.-backed color revolutions. While these claims will likely be deployed anyways, The narrative of a U.S. orchestrated revolution can undercut the legitimacy of an otherwise locally led movement, playing into the hands of an adversary and sapping popular support for the movement. Lastly, while civil resistance campaigns have a higher historic success rate than violent efforts, they also tend to last much longer. Gandhi's effort for Indian independence extended for several decades, and the U.S. civil rights movement period of peak activity lasted from 1954 to 1968. Maintaining support for this length of time to a specific movement or campaign brings its own set of challenges. Finally, I wanted to translate some of these ideas into concrete .mil PFP recommendations for the civil affairs community. First, with regards to doctrine, I argue that specific literature should be produced to fill the gap on civil resistance. With the exception of a few mentions in publications on special warfare or J-style monographs, there's little written on the field and its role in irregular warfare or other contexts. From this, training should also be developed and codified into both the CAQC and other CA organizations. Civil affairs soldiers across the active and reserve components should be trained to understand the specific elements of an effective civil resistance campaign and develop the skills necessary to train and support such movements, just as special forces do during exercises like Robin Sage. Nesting this training with existing courses will only improve the force's ability to develop and engage civil networks. Lastly, I've always been an advocate for diversifying educational opportunities for the force and feel that this is relevant here as well. Many opportunities exist in civilian academia for CA professionals to broaden their understandings of these sorts of movements and struggles beyond conventional military education models. This can include fully funded graduate programs like the one I'm currently pursuing, as well as using local institutions for periodic LPDs, seminars, conferences, or workshops centered on social movements and civil resistance. An added benefit of these types of encounters is the further development of a global network of experts and a bridging of the civil military gap here at home. In summary, civil resistance continues to be a historically effective, widely pursued, dynamic form of popular struggle across geographies and contexts. Civil affairs is uniquely positioned to become the Army's subject matter experts in this field, and in doing so, can truly transform itself into a force that can win without fighting. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
General Bingham, sir.
I'm here.
Say again?
I was looking at the stopwatch. Good job, Dan. Thank you very much. I think what we'll do is hold off on the questions until the end of the 4 presentations. There are a lot of chat items, but I don't want to get too detailed into them in case we run out of time at the end. Major Tony Smith, are you on deck? And by the way, Dan, I think your presentation was excellent, and good rehearsal for taking the platform at West Point when you become an instructor there. Good luck on that.
Thank you, sir.
Major Smith is going to talk about civil military operations in the age of artificial intelligence. It's a very popular topic these days. But he starts with an interesting concept that malicious artificial intelligence already is impacting civil affairs operations. And then he goes on to present some solutions as he wants to work on the solutions that might be under 3 different umbrellas: detection, protection, and defense. So, Major Smith, come off mute, and you have the podium.
All right, thanks for that introduction, sir. Aloha, everyone, from Honolulu, Hawaii. Major Tony Smith, briefing civil military operations in the age of artificial intelligence. So what does Nicholas Speakman and Vladimir Putin have in common? I would argue that it's the PRC strategy for global hegemony by the year 2050. And so back in the 1940s, Nicholas Speakman predicted China's future rise and being a global competitor against the United States. And this was at a time when the United States was allies with China and enemies with Japan. And he theorized that the coastal regions around Eurasia were vital to U.S. national security interests. He borrowed from Alfred Thayer Mahan and advocated that the United States grow a large navy so we could secure our global commons, i.e. the sea. But if you fast forward to the end of the first quarter of the 21st century, we see that Nicholas Speakman pretty much nailed it. The national security strategy just released in October calls China the only global competitor with the intent along with the increasing means to challenge the international rules-based order. But what Speakman could not foresee is the role that artificial intelligence would have in the 21st century and how it would serve as a complementing feature for control. And so the quote on the bottom is from Vladimir Putin in 2017. Since then, we've seen aggressive artificial intelligence strategies by Russia underneath artificial intelligence-driven asymmetric warfare and artificial intelligence strategies by China underneath the CCP. But what else do these different theories have in common? I would argue it's implications for military and economic power. And so about 90% of global trade passes over the ocean. And it is this reason why Alfred Mahan states that that countries pursue naval power. China now has the largest navy in the world when measured by the number of ships. About 99% of global communication passes using undersea cables. China now has the largest share, or the fourth largest share of undersea cables in the world. About 60% of global GDP is supported by digital communication where these undersea cables exist. And the digital share of GDP is forecasted to grow about 2.5 times faster than physical goods contributing to GDP. In addition, AI is projected to double economic growth by the year 2035, and by 2030 alone, projected to add about 15.7 trillion to global GDP. And you can see on the slide up in the top right, a majority of that is forecasted to go to China. Finally, artificial intelligence is often labeled the third offset technology, preceded by nuclear and stealth technology. Offset meaning that in an asymmetrical matchup, the one that has that technology will most likely be the victor. So if civil affairs is a force for winning without fighting, I find it very important to define it under a challenge. And for my paper, that's China. And specifically out of the national security strategy, its global quest for artificial intelligence dominance by the year 2050. So my agenda is as follows. Let's look at China's strategy, take a look at Russia and Ukraine and see how AI is already playing a role, and then get to the recommendations for civil affairs. And so why look at Chinese strategy? Well, Sun Tzu would say that if we want to be a force for winning without fighting, that's where we need to attack first. And traditionally, and there's a lot of good papers out there, this is where the United States generally fails. We look at how we are going to fight in armed conflict and dominate armed conflict while largely ignoring everything left to bang. Second, Sun Tzu would say that it's far better to break the enemy's resistance without fighting. And in competition, malicious AI is already contesting the psychological and cultural elements of the human domain where civil affairs is said to operate. So if civil affairs wants to be a force for winning without fighting, it's got to develop counter artificial intelligence strategies that reduce or degrade the enemy's means to resist without fighting. So in 2017, China released its artificial intelligence strategy with 3 key milestones. First was to be on par with world leaders in artificial intelligence. Second, to lead. Third, to dominate, with the final goal of 2030 actually in their strategy. Now, if you look at the first 5 years, most researchers would agree that China has met its first goal, and China would argue that it's actually met its second goal of leading. The figures on the left show the large gap in artificial intelligence scientific papers published in the academic community. And you see that China is far surpassing any other country. Now, what this doesn't show is the top 10% of the most cited academic papers in artificial intelligence, which China also has the lead. So then there's AI global patents. The large circle represents China, and you can see they have about 65% shares in global AI patents, followed by the United States at 20%. And then there are figures that look at Chinese spending in artificial intelligence, specifically between the PLA and the DoD. And many of those figures point that they're matching us in AI spending despite our large budget. And some saying that they actually surpass it. Now, there are caveats with these numbers, and we can go over those in Q&A if anybody has questions. Then there are 6 supporting strategies that really drive the quest for AI dominance for China. The first 4 are the 1,000 Talents Program, Made in China 2025, Chinese Standards 2035, and then civil military fusion. But the 2 I have time to go into is the BRI and intelligentized warfare. So the figure on the left is depicts the BRI, and really this is an infrastructure development project that looks at creating these economic belts back to Beijing. And these come in the form of port, stadium, highway, airport, energy projects. And really it's tied to the Made in China 2025, which looks at creating excess in production domestically and then exporting that abroad to really fuel their economy. And with this, many may be familiar with the BRIs allegedly being a debt trap diplomacy tool for China. But really, some researchers would argue that it's really about loose investing with lower standards. Now, the DSR also has an umbrella underneath it. The Belt Road Initiative also has the DSR, which is the Digital Silk Road. And that is concerning to me. About 130 countries that participate in BRI are also, about 1/3 of them also participate in the Digital Silk Road. And so some of those countries you can see depicted on the map on the right. And these you can see stretch around Eurasia, and then they also go into South America and Africa. And really what the Digital Silk Road is about exporting Chinese values and standards and technology. And so if you look at the bottom, you see Hikvision surveillance cameras, a heat map. And in this, it's a Chinese company that is allegedly aided human rights violations in Xinjiang province. And what you see is that all around Eurasia and the belt, along with in North America and South America, how this technology has made its way globally. And then underneath the Digital Silk Road is also China's initiative to lay undersea cables. In the past, China was about 95% dependent on undersea cables. Now that they are the fourth largest in the world with this, and as you can see, they actually bypassed the United States. So the war between Russia and Ukraine really shows how AI is already playing a role in changing the character of warfare. Some of the main open source players in the war between the two are shown on the screen. Now, my paper walks readers through how these examples of artificial intelligence will likely challenge and complicate civil affairs operations, and specifically the 4 core competencies of civil affairs when exercised by a peer with AI technology. Transitional governance takes a look at the power of deepfakes and cyber attacks. With deepfakes, it uses the example of the video portraying President Zelensky telling the Ukrainian population to surrender. And so we can imagine from a civil affairs standpoint, when this type of technology is or method is released into an area where we're supporting transitional governance operations, chaos that may arise from those type of messages being released. Then there's cyber attacks. In 2015, Russia deployed a successful cyber attack on Ukraine's power grid. This has been an activity that they've looked at trying to empower with artificial intelligence technology, and something that the PLA has actively studied as well to show their intent to use AI to attack critical infrastructure. And so a historical example is provided in my paper that takes a look at Operation Torch in World War II and what the cost of losing critical infrastructure means to civil affairs and the trouble that it causes supply lines when we have to ship in needs for the civilian population. And then there is the problems with civil network development engagement and the technologies that may frustrate it. And here we look at Clearview AI and Primer AI. Clearview AI is a facial recognition software company that web scrapes billions of photos off of social media and allows a user to identify someone pretty easily off a photograph. And what Ukraine soldiers have allegedly done is they've used this for psychological effect by taking photos of POWs and KIA, and then contacting family members back in Russia with those photos. And so if we looked at, which I missed, the intelligentized warfare concept for China, which focuses on winning using human cognition. And the underlying premise of intelligentized warfare is using artificial intelligence to do that. And it's about creating coercion and intimidation via that information that comes in to win without fighting. And so with Clearview AI, we clearly see how this might be used for coercion of the civil network. Primer AI focuses on capturing unsecured communication being used by the Russian forces in Ukraine. And what it does is it uses natural language processing that creates a transcript of the radio communication that's taking place. And it automatically categorizes it and tags it for analysts to look at. And so I look at this technology and I see how the COVID lockdown measures are taking place in China and how they're able to track their citizens using artificial intelligence from information that's from Chinese population smartphones, and how in an area where technology has been exported from China, how that could be a vulnerability for civil affairs operating in that area, or the civil networks that exist. Finally, there's a civil knowledge integration, and really the focus here is on programs like OpenAI, which uses GPT-3, which, to summarize it, it is a program that creates a human-like narrative in the form of a news article or social media post. And what it does is it, in great volume in the thousands, can disseminate disinformation out to the population. And so when we're trying to make sense of the operating environment, we have to understand that with programs like this, it's going to be very polluted and it's going to add to the fog of war. Any of these examples are going to challenge civil military integration, which really relies on synergy and synchronization. With all this disinformation that may exist in future warfare, it's going to change the calculus of some of the stakeholders we may rely upon and then disrupt that synergy required for civil military integration. And so I've developed 3 recommendations for civil affairs, starting with detection. Detection is all about creating greater awareness of the digital and data landscape. And this starts with basics of including this in our assessments of civil reconnaissance, of knowing the vulnerabilities of the technologies that exist in the operating area. Next, it's about generating AI expertise within the functionally specialty cells. Civil affairs cannot stand flat-footed. This technology is already being used maliciously, and so civil affairs needs to build that expertise organizationally. And then there are technologies like human in the loop and then full AI programs that allow the analysis of what is generated by artificial intelligence and what is human generated. And really, this is all about integrating these types of programs that allow us to parse out what is this polluted information and what is information that we can look at to create a greater understanding. Protect focuses on civil affairs forces and then protecting the civil network. And really what we need to do here is look at technology that exists to degrade AI's efficiency. One such example is a program like Loki, which can sanitize photographs and then reduce artificial intelligence, specifically facial recognition software's ability to detect who that individual is about 99% of the time. And then there are physical barriers and masking of the environment. The lead briefer showed images of Hong Kong protests, and this is something that was used in Hong Kong, where you had methods of clothing wear and facial devices that reduce AI's effectiveness for a civil resistance movement. And then there's masking of the environment. So this is a manipulation of the environment to make sensors or recognition software less effective. If we look at an example of this in China, the Chinese PLA has actively looked at how they can disguise their tanks to look like construction equipment by painting stripes on it to make recognition software less effective. And so I argue that this same type of method can be used in the civil environment to mask objects within there. And then there are good cybersecurity protocols for civil affairs to consider to reduce their digital footprint. This is all about privacy settings and making sure that we're not vulnerable to this type of AI detection. Finally is defend. Defend looks at AI countermeasures that defend the civil environment at large. And so this begins with media literacy campaigns. And this is something that's been focused on in Ukraine, but has actually been focused on in Taiwan. Taiwan being the largest consumer of Chinese disinformation. This is about creating tools for the population to be able to analyze, evaluate, create, and act on information. Then there are AI fact check resources that can be informed to the population. And this is something that's happened in Ukraine and also happens in Taiwan as well. And so this can allow be an AI program that takes a look at a social media account or a post or a news article and test its reliability. And then in Ukraine, we saw initially the White House leverage key opinion leaders and influencers within social media to counter disinformation. And I would argue this could be something that civil affairs, a role for civil affairs to do. And finally, and most importantly, with the term integrated deterrence, much effort has gone into countering China's AI rise. And we see this with the recent export control bans on semiconductor chips. If we look at the DoD's efforts, they've published a responsible artificial intelligence strategy. And the fourth tenet is responsible AI ecosystem. And this is all about global engagement with our partners and allies about the responsible development, deployment of artificial intelligence in the environment. So here I see civil affairs as a counter to the digital Silk Road and Chinese efforts to try to export that technology within the spheres we operate in.
Hey, Major Smith, thanks so much. Are you done? I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, yeah. But in summary, just to close, AI is here. I think it's here to stay, and we assume risk by being a Luddite and not embracing the role that this is going to play in the future. And civil affairs is best postured to go after strategy, and to do this, implementing those counter AI strategies, presenting the recommendations. That's all, sir.
Well, thanks. But you are right in the middle of one of the most predominant topics, both in the civilian world and the military world. And I'm glad you're all over it. A question I'd like you to address a little later on is, how do you see a link up with PSYOP? And whether the two should coalesce, but make a note and we'll come back to you on that. John Wirges, please get in the on deck circle. John Wirges is going to talk about governance. It's his topic. The historians here all know that civil affairs probably reached its ultimate role in governance post-World War II in Europe. And he's going to talk about how he sees an emergence. I mean, that lead role in governance almost become a dirty word to some extent, of military intruding into governance. But it had a critical historical role, and there's a clear role going forward. So especially at the interagency level and coordinating with the other departments, and make a contribution to improve governance and civil affairs participation in the modern operational environment. So John, you're off.
Thank you, sir. Everyone, I put the slide that I was going to use to guide this presentation inside of the chat. The internet at the Civil Affairs Academic Facility gets shaky every time it rains, so I'm going to conserve as much bandwidth as possible. But thank you very much, sir. My name is Captain John Wirges. I'm a Phase 2 instructor in the Civil Affairs Qualification course. I'm coming to you from Fort Bragg, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. The 2022 National Defense Strategy identifies the People's Republic of China, Russia, and transboundary threats as primary challenges to the United States. Europe is seeing its first major ground war in 60 years. The world is in a state of flux and struggling to maintain the post-Westphalian order. The National Security Strategy and NDS suggests that U.S. success in this multipolar world requires a whole-of-government approach, campaigning across all elements of national power to support the campaign of integrated deterrence. Department of Defense unique capabilities, which can compete to gain strategic understanding, overmatch, and deterrence, are more important than ever before. One such capability is civil affairs. The Civil Affairs Branch was originally created to support governance and government functions, and has always served to provide commanders with tools to consolidate military objectives into political victory. CA formations at all echelons fundamentally serve to illuminate and support the creation of cognitive and physical resiliencies, which deter conflict from ever occurring and blunt the impact if it should. These effects are derived through targeted operations, emanating first through providing commanders an understanding of the operational environment, deeper than merely the battlefield. This capability must be articulated and refined through continued conversations over how governance capabilities manifest in generalist CA units. This paper recommends doctrinal refinements through standard FM revision or special texts, which include greater political military analysis and the relationship of interconnected PMISI or political, military, economic, social, information, and infrastructure systems, as well as corresponding social and anthropological systems to governance. For example, FM 3-57, Civil Affairs Operations, defines governance as the state's ability to serve the citizens through the rules, processes, and behavior by which interests are articulated, resources are managed, and power is exercised in a society, end quote. This definition is nested with Joint Publication 3-57 and taken from Joint Publication 3-24, Counterinsurgency, which was published last in 2018. This definition, narrow in scope, infers that governance is reliant upon the activities of a formal nation state, which is inconsistent with the notion that irregular warfare is a struggle between state and non-state actors for influence over civilian populations. My paper recommends a definition which nests greater with the concept of irregular warfare. For example, governance is a society's systems and processes of organization by which political power is exercised, resources are allocated, and behavior is influenced. These political, economic, social, and security systems may be formal or informal. Recommendations to education and training also orient on the way we can better articulate the way that CAO nests with government capabilities, not simply in government functions. The Joint Forces understanding of the operational environment views PMISI variables as interdependent systems and subsystems in environment, which ultimately generate influence and power. These systems, notably political, economic, and social systems, are the core systems by which subnational and national power are generated, and upon which CAO should orient during all phases of conflict. These doctrinal and educational updates should showcase how existing methodologies and tools, such as civil network development, mapping of critical systems, and resource allocation, are easy to implement solutions towards articulating how a governance capability manifests at all echelons of CA. The development of subnational and regional PMISI systems set the foundation for layering these preventative effects to harden cognitive resiliencies, create overmatch, and deter adversary action through active support to campaign plans and contingency plans. Should conflict arise, a common procedure of mapping human and physical infrastructure can provide limited governance support through engagement with social networks and resource allocation. By doctrinally broadening the aperture of governance, including doctrinal amplifications to terms such as transitional governance, which nests more with the transitional military authority task than support to civil administration, CA generalists can bypass the city manager conversation that is routinely being had in CA formations. Notwithstanding, this paper also advocates for the development of off-the-shelf governance and government function courses available to CA units. The 95th has begun this process with Duke University. Advanced education courses on local government function and relationships should be built to accommodate a use of KPOC annual training in an MFP2 or MFP11 fundable solution to provide advanced training on government functions, systems analysis, network development, and associated infrastructure. An advanced education course on government functions may find success and sustainability at 2nd Special Warfare Training Group, built and systemized under the Special Warfare Center of Excellence. An advanced transitional governance course may bring experts in public policy and government management together with CA professionals to provide these skills to use KPOC and special operations professionals. Additionally, special operations should continue integrating CAO with sensitive activities and network development, directly impacting governance and underground and auxiliary development. These steady state operations support strategic objectives, increasing the cost of adversaries' actions and maintaining conflict below the threshold of large scale violence. Over time, the creation and maintenance of these resiliencies support our allies and harden our partners' cognitive and physical spaces to directly support resistance. Doctrinal updates which codify the role that special operations civil affairs play in the use of surrogates and proxies to map networks, engage PMISI systems in denied areas, and ultimately support social mobilization and resistance will help systemize the role that CA plays in soft network development. Furthermore, these programs directly enable the illumination and engagement of individuals and systems in society, which support ongoing irregular warfare objectives, preparation of the environment activities, and operational flexible response options. In this manner, CA can assist in preventing conflict, and if inevitable, provides options to policymakers to maintain conflict at thresholds under major armed conflict. Long-term organizational and policy considerations are equally as important to building a true value proposition in governance. As the CA Core works to build institutional knowledge on how soft specific network development and functional specialist specific military government functions support strategic effects and operational goals, Enhanced broadening opportunities and loan programs with the interagency may be opportunities for active duty and reserve CA officers and soldiers. CA officers and NCOs should be provided opportunities to work with agencies including the Department of State, the U.S. Agency for International Development, and the Defense Intelligence Agency. This is not a unique phenomenon. Officers from other branches, including the Special Forces branch, have had opportunities to serve in interagency assignments for the professional development of their branches. Military government specialists, or 38 Gulfs, should be also provided opportunities to go on loan with areas of the federal government or Department of the Army in which they could benefit from further development, such as with the 95th Civil Affairs Brigade. Loaning 38 Gulf officers to special operations or conventional Army staffs may provide functional specialists, professional development, and Army operations planning, providing a greater understanding to 38 Gulfs of the military processes and functions in which they may not have expertise. Soft CA officers should be provided opportunities to go on interagency loan or broadening assignment with areas of the interagency supporting a greater understanding of network development and support to underground or auxiliary civic organizations, including the DIA and DOS. These assignments provide a greater awareness of the intelligence processes CA supports and United States Foreign Service efforts to support diplomatic, military, and economic power projection abroad. Additionally, greater interagency collaboration through exercise and joint task force training provides value in building a trusting relationship necessary for the execution of civil military integration and transitional governance. The Vietnam War's Civil Operations and Revolutionary Development Support, or CORDS program, showcases the success that a combined interagency organization can have in achieving counterinsurgency and stabilization effects. Part of CORDS' success came from a unified command structure incorporating indigenous partners at all levels. With the advent of unity of effort over unity of command, trust between military governance practitioners and development and diplomacy officers is vital. Loan officers from the interagency at the Civil Affairs Brigade level is one method to build this trust. Another is the implementation of the whole of government mission command and training exercises, such as CA Brigade annual training events and the 95th Civil Affairs Brigade's Operation Stockholm. These exercises can be built to accommodate both large-scale combat operations and special warfare exercises, and may support relationship and trust building with practitioners necessary for DoD and DOS collaboration. The Civil Affairs Corps owes the Department of the Army expertise in not only administering occupied territories, but supporting a knowledgeable engagement with civil society to achieve a variety of military ends. The U.S. Army has been begrudgingly conducting occupation activities, either through formal military governments or support to indigenous civil administrations since the American Civil War. These lessons, if properly built into everything from theater campaign plans to civil affairs team critical tasks, can create cognitive and physical resiliencies which deter conflict from occurring. Thank you for your time and your consideration.
Thank you, Major Smith. The question I'd like you to sandbag for later is tell us what history or experience you have so far in effecting those interagency assignments and placements. Okay. Our last presenter is going to be, hopefully he's on board because he was finishing a teaching assignment at West Point, Lieutenant Colonel JohnPaul LeCedre. I'm assuming he will be on, and he's going to focus on deep expertise. In other words, moving civil affairs upstream to a more prominent role of supporting the GCCs. He has 3 clear recommendations he focused on in his paper. I'm not going to steal his thunder and summarize them, so I'm not going to give them away. And if he's here, Colonel, you're on.
I am here, sir. Thank you so much for accommodating me.
Sure.
So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just jumping on. Actually, I'm on faculty at West Point, so I just finished teaching a class, ran on through my coat. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. As the general indicated, my paper is about primarily military governance in the 38 Gulf program and how do we make that better. Just by means of my background, I was prior to my assuming faculty position at West Point, I commanded one of the civil affairs battalion prior to attending War College on a fellowship recently. So this is something that I've dealt with on the tactical and operational levels. It's something that interests me. Commanders and indeed our civilian leaders have had to engage civil authorities and population strategically during virtually every conflict, as we all know as civil affairs practitioners. Engaging in the civil component requires a level of what I call deep expertise. And that's a type that's gained not just from military training, but actually from years of academic institutions and industry experience. And with about 76% at this point of all DoD CA assets, the Army Reserve has a preponderance of the force structure and a ready-made vehicle to provide the Army with a catalog of civilian deep expertise. With that, there have been attempts to do that. Clearly, we've all been talking about the 38 Golf program, which in my thesis, despite several well-intentioned and hard-fought organizational changes over the previous decade, it is 38 Golf as it is has not gotten us to our end state. And so my paper seeks to identify the causes of what I determine as this strategic means gap, which faces the CA Corps in the framework of within the framework of 38 Golf, and how structural changes can provide increased capacity to our strategic level commanders. In researching this paper, and in addition to the written record that I've cited in my paper, I've had the privilege to speak to most of the former USA CAPOC commanders, several other senior general officer level leaders, and just people who were in the room when the 38 Golf program was envisioned. That's been a great opportunity over the last several months. So our current strategic environment, as we're not, of course, any longer involved in the two major theaters of operation, Iraq and Afghanistan, and the war on terror. According to the national security strategy, the recent one is that we should support relationships with allies and partners through theater security cooperation. In terms of CA, that means disaster response and other peaceful efforts not tied to armed operations. That gets in directly with our winning without fighting theme. The recent national security strategy confirms China and Russia as major rivals, which are responsible for the use, which emphasizing the responsible use of our military and elevating diplomacy to, quote, a tool of first resort. So investment in civil society and strengthening longstanding political, economic, and cultural connections are a priority, especially regions, developing regions such as Africa, where we're actively involved, primarily use of CAPOC, as well as the active duty forces. So moving forward, how do we do this? CA needs to shift to better organize and recruit soldiers in the governance field whose skills, civilian experiences, deep cultural knowledge meet strategic requirements while lowering the barriers to entry. The specific proposals I make in my paper are to, one, we need to get back to 38 Golf the way it was envisioned, which is narrowing the career field for officers who gain appointment through direct commission or direct appointment. And to be clear, and this is, I think, a necessary distinction per at least the people that I talked to who were in the room, direct appointments are when we have civilians become directly as officers. They're breveted officers. Direct commissions are where we have NCOs or prior non-commissioned officers become commissioned officers. So that's number one. We narrow 38 Golf to that. Number two, that we recharacterize functional specialist duty positions to branch and material assignments with a robust ASI program. And this is not unheard of. This is the way we used to do it for years and years before 9/11. And I'll discuss a little more about that. And then number three, kind of the obvious solution, which is provide more meaningful incentives to retain high skill officers, because the officers who are going to be the governance officers are typically the ones who are least able to serve in these positions due to their other obligations. So how do we get these guys who require special recruitment in? So what do I mean by strategic means gap? The CA proponency back in 2015 established officially the 38 Golf AOC to, quote, enable the force to assess, monitor, protect, reinforce, establish, and transform political, social, economic, and cultural institutions, and give capabilities to achieve U.S. national goals and objectives. In envisioning the 38 Golf program, the leaders of USA CAPOC had the right idea. They intended to create a pathway to commission high-skilled civilians and enlisted soldiers in a limited duty capacity. The original concept of the program focused around direct appointments and direct commissions as 38 Golf officers. And indeed, it took more than 7 years after the program was envisioned. I think it was 2021 or early this year in 2022 when the first direct appointees were sworn to the Corps. That being said, that's not the first 38 Golfs that existed in our military. Back in 2015, the mechanisms for direct commissioning and direct appointments were not in place. So contrary to the original intent, we started branch transferring 38 Golfs into the existing AOC qualified officers into 38 Golfs. So the key premise of my paper is essentially it's difficult to understate how much that decision to branch transfer has undermined the original purpose of the 38 Golf program. The fundamental error and the structural error is this, is that the 38 Golf model was intended to be an additional source of deep expertise within the Civil Affairs Corps. And that's from outside normal change of recruitment. It was not intended to be the sole source of deep expertise. That expertise exists within 38 Alphas, our civil affairs generalists, and it also exists throughout the military, both in Compo 3 and also in Compo 2 in the National Guard, where you have people who are doing incredible work, who desire to maintain their careers as whether they be civil affairs generalists or infantry officers, artillery officers, so to speak, and who can do broadening assignments as functional specialists, as civil governance specialists based on their deep expertise. So by focusing on the 38 Gulfs as the only source of expertise, it subverts the original intent of the program, raising a bar to entry for a program that was intended to actually, instead of do what it's done, to broaden the way the Army assesses and categorizes and frankly uses deep expertise. The numbers in fact bear this out. Within USACAPOC, there are 557 38 Gulf coded duty positions. From the outset of the program until 2020, the peak fill was 7 to 8% of these coded positions. Currently, due to some very focused and dedicated recruitment from our existing development managers, which we had the pleasure of hearing from in our civil affairs annual meeting about a month ago, they've managed to double the duty positions, and right now we have approximately 80 38 Gulfs, and that's still about 14 to 15% of all coded positions. And these numbers are numbers that I've gotten directly from the current managers over at USACAPOC. So it follows that over 7 years. After implementation, the vast majority of 38G positions are still filled by 38 Alphas, or they're altogether unfilled. Now, I'll add a caveat in that there are a significant number of 38 Gulf nominees and candidates that are currently waiting to get scrolled, but those positions have not yet been filled. So the other issue that comes up with the strategic means gap is that even when newly minted 38 Gulf officers have surmounted the barriers to entry to the program, they found that there's virtually no published doctrine on 38 Gulf career and career progression. Existing progression documents state there are no identified developmental assignments for military governance officers. So we're trying to bring people in who are ostensibly some of the most talented people we have in the military, being direct commissioned, direct appointed, but not giving them a means of actually forwarding their military career. So how do we do this? So the 38 Gulf career field as a means for bringing civilian specialists into commissioned military service is an absolutely useful idea that we should maintain in the military, and that we should maintain in USACAPOC the way we've been doing it largely. This is creating a capability that only these deep experts are able to do. That being said, the 38 Gulf AOC, which is currently the sole mechanism to deliver that capability, is unnecessarily stifling the Corps to meet that strategic need. What should happen is for existing commissioned officers, that is CA generalists or any other officers, there is no need to award these officers a separate AOC in order to fill the mechanism. The skill classification system that we have, ASIs, is sufficient. ASIs can and should be used. They have been used in the past to categorize and develop levels of skill. The 38 Gulf program itself, that is 38G officers, should be limited to direct appointees and direct commissionees whose high valued skills have been identified by means of the current board system. 38 Gulf AOC, bottom line, should be one of many means of entry into military governance, not the sole means of entry. How do we do this? We insist that any officer serving as a functional specialist should not necessarily hold the 38 Gulf AOC, but rather hold the appropriate ASI, which exists as they are awarded to the 38 Gulfs right now and to non-38 Gulfs. As it stands, 38 Gulfs, making them the sole area of deep expertise unnecessarily disjoins the reserved CA officer corps and has created a superfluous bar of entry, which is contrary to the development model, which relies on a selection board that meets intermittently, applies often unclear standards to produce 38 Gulfs. And perhaps the most significant distinguishing factor of the Reserve Corps at large is that our wide variety of civilian skills could potentially be brought to bear not just from civilian direct appointees, but across the Corps, and the barriers to entry should be lowered in order to do that. A program to recruit military government specialists for use within the Civil Affairs Corps should begin with a simple and decentralized way to identify those needs for the commands. This challenge could be addressed by establishing clear career progression, clear educational and experiential guidelines for use with the various already existing civil affairs ASIs. in order to be associated with the military government specialists of different sorts. The approval level of these ASIs should be delegated further. They should be delegated to the first general officer within an officer's chain of command. Most often, this is going to be one of the 4 KCOM commanders. This would eliminate the need of separate career development model for 38 Golfs, and it would reduce the time requirement for the barrier of entry. We need to remember that these civil affairs ASIs that we currently have associated with these 38 Golfs, they don't themselves confer any sort of unique military skill, such as, the common ones we're used to, parachutist, instructor. They identify the presence of a civilian skill set that already exists, that's already been present for many, many years. They identify and a critical asset to aid a support a commander. That's what they're there for. Military government ASIs, unlike most other ASIs in the Army, reflect skills earned outside of service versus those that are earned by institutional training, such as regular ASIs. According to at least one of the KPOC commanders I spoke to, ASIs, the fundamental issue of this program is that ASIs do not confirm a skill, they recognize a skill. The board process should thus err on the side of awarding an ASI versus the withholding of it, because in the worst case, inconsistencies of the awards would be incidental and would not present nearly as much of a hindrance to the strategic value of this program, where we currently have somewhere between an 8 to 15% fill. Furthermore, and that is essentially assuming an unnecessary level of risk by having 80 to 90% unfilled versus erring towards the side of awarding an ASI. Further, if the ASI program in civil affairs and military governance were properly implemented, the 38 Golf AOC would be focused on identifying, commissioning high-level civilians and enlisted soldiers for immediate service as commissioned government specialists. Officers who are already commissioned need only apply to ASIs. Ideally as part of an entry process in the reserves and a further personnel review questionnaire. These officers would be ASI qualified, would be liberally encouraged to transfer and serve as government specialists in broadening assignments during their normal career progression, rather than as dedicated military governance officers who have essentially no means of career progression and thus significant disincentive to do this. So efficiently leveraging a wide range of civilian skill sets among reserve officers would necessarily involve lowering that bar of entry into the program. This means that qualified reserve officers could apply their skill set within the CA Corps and between other lucrative opportunities within their branches, such as command and staff positions, without abandoning career aspirations. Because what we have to remember is that the populations of the folks who are doing the greatest things and the most significant deep expertise things in the outside world, those are often contemporaneous with the population who are pursuing leadership and command positions in the military. And we need to recognize that and incorporate that within the career model rather than just ignore that in the career model. So rather than being a discrete career field, the military governance program should be treated as a reserve pool of talent throughout the reserve component of the military. And I say that meaning Compo 2 and Compo 3. So in my paper, I do apply .mil-PF model, going over the doctrinal, organizational, training, material, leadership and education, personnel and facilities. All of those changes are proposed within the paper. I'm not going to go over that. That's a bit too lengthy, I think, for this presentation. But I would ask and encourage you to read through the paper. I believe that based on the .mil-PF model, these changes would significantly simplify and reduce the administrative burdens that has been self-imposed by the current system. I would encourage you to read through the paper and submit any critique and questions to me throughout my revisions. To wrap things up, a successful support of peer to near peer strategic priorities requires that our Corps, the Civil Affairs Corps, reclaim itself as a strategic asset. The Corps must be able to provide customizable special teams, a large and readily identifiable force pool, and highly specialized personnel within the reserve component, Compos 2 and 3. Strategic capability requires both breadth and depth of experience in order to fulfill the supported GCC requirements. The transition from got a pet situation here. The transition from the 38 Golf program, the Corps must be able to identify customizable special teams. The transition from the 38 Golf program to branch and material positions will add the breadth of experience already contained within the reserve pool. The basic structures needed to do so currently exist, or they've been recently piloted. All that is required is an appetite for change and the same characteristics and desire for innovation that preceded the creation of the Corps itself. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time.
Thank you, Colonel. I've been out of the KPOC chair for over 20 years. So my question is, where would the ultimate approving authority reside for your recommendations relative to the ASI and limiting the 38s to direct entries?
Well, sir, I think in terms of the selection of the 38s themselves, that can remain where it is currently, which is at proponency when you, in terms of direct commissioning and direct appointing. That's what kind of makes this recommendation easy. It doesn't require that much change in terms of what we do. It just requires limiting the ones we have now. In terms of, for example, in my case, I'm a 38 Alpha. I'll use myself as an example. I'm an attorney as a civilian. I've never been a JAG in my entire career. I've always chosen to be a civil affairs generalist. If I, at some point between, let's say, my battalion command and what I do further in the reserve, wanted to serve as a broadening position as a 38 or as a military governance officer, I should be able to just get the ASI, the judiciary ASI, I believe it's 4 Juliet or 4 Golf, and go serve in that position without having to transition to a completely different AOC. I see that as a needless bar to entry. So it would actually delegate those authorities down to where we award ASIs now, which is the first general officer in our chain of command.
Okay, thank you. Major Wirges, do you want to comment on the history you've observed of interagency transfers and positional loans?
Yes, sir. There are a limited number of positions that exist in your agency on loan. They're not necessarily loan programs as much as they're slotted broadening assignments, but these positions are incredibly limited in number. I think that the loan program exists more robustly in other branches. I know that the Special Forces branch, for example, has a number of loan positions within the intelligence community. The methodology I would take in order to increase that exposure would be twofold. The first would be to go to continue our collaboration with SOCOM's Joint Interagency Task Force for Special Forces Command, and SOCOM have the JIADF up in the National Capital Region that is the liaison between the interagency and soft units. The second prong would be first building that informal trusting relationship and advocating and articulating why this would be valuable both for the interagency and for the Department of the Army. So by building that relationship through a consistent and persistent engagement and building that relationship, we would need advocates at both the OSD level and at the policy decision making level and a variety of these interagency departments. Over, sir.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to the chat room now and throw out a few questions. First of all, for Major Smith, can the Chinese government remotely tamper, manipulate, or doctor Chinese smart city platforms to use for its own purposes and gain the cloak of invisibility?
Well, thank you for that question. I think it's a good one. And I think it's one of the risks that we ought to be concerned about. If we look at Chinese goodwill in creating these types of smart cities, Chinese policy is usually very transactional in nature. And this is based off of the Chinese cultural concept of guanxi, which is all about creating a network to conduct business, and it's very transactional in nature. And so for whether or not they would do it, I would say we look at companies like Huawei, and what I'd be concerned about is some of the strategies I mentioned, like civil military fusion, and what that has led to as far as forced technology transfers, and then underneath the 1,000 talent program, intellectual property theft. So I would say that the Chinese would use every means available to them to be able to create an advantage for themselves. So to your question, I would say that there are other areas where they practice that type of behavior. And so, I would say just personally me that it would be likely.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Peter Griffin has a question for Colonel LeCedre. He didn't type it up, so if you're on the net, take yourself on mute and ask the question, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, sir. So, Colonel, my question is this. You talked about developing career paths for the 38 Gulfs that come in through direct appointment, direct commission. My concern with that, as somebody who is actively considering a 38 Gulf position, is I don't want people like me to be in traditional commissioned officer leadership roles. I want us to be brought in, in event of emergency, bring in these folks to solve this particular problem set and then tell them to go home. Because, we would not have the requisite experience, education, and military training to be good, effective combat leaders necessarily. And, I would not deprive somebody with that level of experience in uniform from having those positions. And so from my perspective as somebody who's considering that, a barrier to entry for me is not lack of career development necessarily. It's the actual barrier to entry of the HRC process.
So thank you, Pete. That's a fantastic question. So the issue that we're having right now is not the career progression for those like you who are the deep expertise professionals who have who want a direct commission. The issue is that we have officers, the majority of 38 Golfs over the first 7 years, who are branch transfers, more folks like who are coming from career fields like me, who may still want to have that career progression. So those are the first type of people, right? Those people, if we take my recommendation and not require them to be 38 Golfs, that program is that issue is sidestepped, so we don't have that problem. Now, in terms of career progression for somebody like you, let's say a putative 38 Golf who is coming to the program, that career progression, unlike a 38 Alpha, does not have to be, okay, you need a command position, you need this, you need that. That progression necessarily focuses a limited duty officer who, like you, for example, based on what I know, is coming in probably as at least a field grade, if not a mid to higher field grade officer. You don't have to go through all that career progression. But right now, as we have it, we have a significant population who do have that military background, who want to command, and who are being deprived of the opportunity to do so. So that's why I say, let's bifurcate this and make 38 Golfs only individuals like you and bring people like you in with deep expertise. So I hope that answers your question.
Hey, thanks. We have a question for Captain Moriarty. When and in what circumstances is nonviolent civil resistance appropriate compared to armed resistance? Parenthetical comment, long-term resistance to an oppressive regime versus active insurgency versus large-scale combat operations. And when and how should CA forces engage?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, kind of the $1 million question. There are scholars in multiple fields that study this exact question. I think the cop out that I'll articulate a little on is that it really does depend, and it can really take a lot of different forms across those contexts. I think one key thing in particular is the presence of a principal, and by that I mean an international sponsor to whatever opponent that resistance movement is struggling against. So, for example, U.S. civil rights movement. There's been the argument made that if the South wasn't beholden to a certain degree to the federal government, would they have made the concessions that they did? In a similar way, Milosevic of Serbia was beholden to Russia, and after a certain point, the Russians started to transmit that they were starting to suspend some of their support. Same with the Arab Spring in Cairo in 2011, when the U.S. was indicating its withdrawal of support from the Mubarak regime. And so that presence of a international principle can be pretty influential. Aside from that, I would argue that in my paper, I argue that nonviolent or civil resistance can show up across all those different contexts. Historically, for example, Nazi-occupied Norway, amidst the more dramatic, heavy water sabotage missions, there were very vibrant and robust nonviolent resistance movement in Oslo, focused on psychologically isolating the Nazis, on slowing down mining operations that were trying to fuel the war effort. So across the different contexts and geographies, it really can take a number of different shapes, and that's again one of its huge advantages, is that it can. There's so many diverse ways to pursue it. I hope that answered your question.
While you're up, another question that came in, it sounds like it's from a lawyer. What title of U.S. code do you see civil resistance support or training to resign?
So I guess my short answer to that would probably be Title 10. Again, just based on some of the context that I argue, hypothetical context, that I probably feel more comfortable with that answer. That being said, a lot of the capabilities that I talk about in terms of like social movements, organizing, those kind of things, those are, I would argue, a lot of the same skills that are being taught and trained under Title 22 and just democracy promotion, strengthening civil society. It's hard for any kind of, like I've said, like the most vibrant, or not vibrant, the most robust civil resistance movements really rely on a strong civil society and network of organizations. So I would argue a lot of those kind of SimC type things that are already happening would support a strong resistance movement if such a occasion arose. Over.
Thank you. Our president of the association, Joe Kirlin, has dragged us kicking and screaming back to this very specific topic of your papers. And we'll do it in the order in which you spoke. He would like each of you to give your elevator speech and specific bullet points on how your work will enhance winning without fighting. Captain Moriarty, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, so I think I feel very strongly that this very much represents a way to actually win without fighting. And by that I mean, if we're talking about achieving objectives of destabilizing an adversarial regime in an IW in a regular warfare context, or as we're seeing in Ukraine, to support an armed component of a large-scale combat operation through some of the means I discussed. These forms of nonviolent resistance, while not technically fighting, they're still confrontational, they're still achieving meaningful effects on the ground across all those major contexts. So I think that CA providing and supporting those types of movements across contexts achieves a lot of those, again, that victory before war that General Beaupere talked about. Yeah, I think that's how I put it.
Thanks. Major Smith?
Yes, so my work focused on attacking strategy, and specifically the main threat highlighted in national security strategy, China, with the intent to reshape the international rules-based order, which Sun Tzu would say is required to win without fighting. So it looks at that particular strategy. The counter AI strategies that I recommend are all designed around reducing the enemy's means to resist, which is another core aspect of Sun Tzu's strategy for winning without fighting. And so by CA operating in a way that counters these AIs, it reduces the Chinese ability, their effectiveness to operate.
Thank you. Major Wirges?
Yes, sir. Fundamentally, the only way to win without fighting is to create resiliencies and support civil resistance, much like Captain Moriarty was talking about, in support of contingency plans and theater campaign plans that provide overmatch and deterrence of the enemy to act. These cognitive and physical resiliencies and then the resistance they support, it requires an incredible amount of engagement with civil society. Our value proposition in that is the illumination mapping and engagement with these systems that allocate resources and control. We have articulated this in the buzzword of governance. I continue to challenge my students in how are you defining governance to a commander or to the interagency without using the word, because I feel like we've gotten stuck on it. So the methodologies that I've outlined in my paper provide opportunities to grow the literature, to grow the institutional development, and to grow the subject matter expertise among both military governance specialists and CA journalists on how governance can actively support the creation of resiliencies and resistance movements to deter large-scale combat operations and create resiliencies in society.
Thank you. Colonel LeCedre?
Yes, thank you, sir. So military governance is our strategic skill within our core. What we've done over the conflicts of the early 20th century has highlighted CA as largely a reactive force, that is a tactical or an operational force. As I mentioned in my presentation and paper, diplomacy, which necessarily includes shaping the civil military situation, is our tool of first resort. first resort before fighting. Providing a robust governance program allows us to do exactly that. It allows us to win without fighting. Leveraging our already massive number of existing officers, high skill officers, deep expertise officers, in addition to new direct commissionees and direct appointments, is how we expand that strategic capability and leverage that capability, which is the core of who we are as a corps, and how we win without fighting.
Thanks. Hey, Chris, you ready to put up the ballot, put up the election options?
Yes, we are, sir. All you have to do now is I will launch the poll. Let's see what time we got here, General. It's 15:50 on my Mickey Mouse. So how about 1600? We close the polls. That should be enough time for people to.
We have 40 participants, so I hope you will all vote, but not often.
Yeah, just within the next 10 minutes. Here we go. While that is all going on, and I know you guys can multitask, a lot of you have been asking about where you can get copies of the presentations, the presentations and references and so on that were used in the symposium. And the way to do that is to go to the Civil Affairs Symposium website, see the resources tab, and then you click on Research Library. Now, there's one caveat to all this. You have to have a member login because this is behind the firewall. So consider membership. It's basically the cost of a couple of lattes each year, not bad at all. When you consider everything, you click on Research Library, it will open up, and then you will have events. You click on events, and then you go to 2002. Excuse me, 2022, I should say, and then there it is, the symposium. And then there are subfolders in there for the reference documents that were referenced, including FM 3-57, the various strategies, et cetera, briefings, and the issue paper presentations. So there they are, they're all there. While you're looking in that area, we also have the Publication Advisory Board for those of us who are interested in publishing or you're working on an academic paper. We have an entire board prepared to help you with academic excellence. If you're at the War College or if you're at the Command and General Staff College or any other place, any other school where you need some help writing military academic papers. We also have education and training sites there where we rolled up all the different resources, mostly online. And so you go to learning resources there. Here are the ones that are in the PME resources, all these different resources. In the non-PME world, where if you're doing research or personal level professional development, you can go here. So there you go. Those are some of the things that are available to you through that particular tab of the website. Then you have the media enterprise, the civil affairs issue papers that are from the previous years. You can download those. They're available along with these roundtable reports done each spring. And then the Eunomia Journal, which in and of itself is a great resource. One of their articles was on the Sons of Liberty as an information warfare case study. Was cited earlier today. So there's plenty of stuff in there. And if you're interested in writing for them, we do have an editorial board and there are sufficient guidelines for that. And we talk about the member benefits, the medallions and different awards. If you belong to units and you're interested in making sure that your people are appropriately recognized by the Civil Affairs Corps or the Civil Affairs Association, we can work that for you as well. If you're not interested in any of that, but you want to maintain, positive contact with us and stay in touch, then you can go ahead and homepage for the latest articles, journal, and then you can also subscribe right down here. Just put your email in there. No, we won't sell your email to the people who are working on the scammers on the whole Camp Lejeune issue. So you should be okay. A quick little PSA on that, and continue with the polling and
And this is John McElligott here. Just another reminder on the Civil Affairs Association site. You can already register for the 2023 symposium, which again will be online. So if you go on to the website civilaffairsassoc.org, and then under the events area, you can see the upcoming events and register for that as well. We'll drop that into the chat so you can go directly there. There will also be the upcoming dates for the roundtable, looking at 2 weekends, 2 dates in April, and that information will be forthcoming. And Colonel Holshek, I think since we are both logged in right now as Eunomia Journal, one of us just, I think, has to hop out so we can launch the poll unless you can.
let me hop out.
Okay.
And then I'll log back in because I can't figure out how to vote on this thing. Can't cast a ballot.
All right. All right, stand by, everyone. We're figuring out how to launch this poll here.
And I'd like to thank each of the presenters for both excellent papers, which will be even more refined over time prior to publication, and for your excellent presentations. It may seem a little unfair that you're being judged on the efficacy of your presentation, not the granular detail of your papers. This has been the way we've worked it out, and it's a good exercise to train you for both excellent paper writing as well as presentations. And you all did an excellent job, and thank you very much for all that input. So we'll now wait for the results.
All right, folks, General Bingham, this poll is not launching right now. I'm going to add into the chat here all 4 of these presentations so that individuals can simply select the one and we will tally it up through the chat.
So the original voting did not come through, okay?
It did not, sir. So we will put the papers down here so you can simply identify with the Captain McLaughlin one taken out. First was paper number 1 from Captain Moriarty. Second was paper number 2
Major Smith.
Yeah, so identify by last name if you would. LeCedre, Moriarty, Smith, or Wirges.
John, could you read off how many votes were for each of those?
Yeah, I'm going to tally these up as we go through the chat. The poll did not launch, so we're going through the old school way and tallying in the chat right now.
This has a whole lot more suspense.
It does, right? This is the voting live. I'm living here in Phoenix, Arizona, and as you saw in national news, we're trying to figure out how to improve our voting system.
I think what happened, John, is because I'm the one who launched the poll and then I signed out. I must have deleted the poll.
It's all good. We'll tally it right here. So if, sir, you do your count on your end, I'll do this, my count on my end. Just going through the chat. I see,
Let me know if we need to call in some election monitors from PricewaterhouseCoopers.
exactly.
I hope the server or the data center is not in Broward County or in Florida.
And then we got some more people on the line. Go ahead and drop your last name of the presenter in there.
Okay, let's hope there will not be any challenges to this election.
Yeah, so I've gotten all the way down to the bottom here. If there's no one else voting, I've got 6 votes for Smith, 6 for LeCedre, 9 for Moriarty, and 3 for Wirges. 2 more for LeCedre,
I knew it. Some folks were holding their votes.
right?
That means Captain Moriarty comes in first. Colonel
Yes,
Smith-
sir, he does.
Are we officially closing the ballot?
Anyone else who has not voted?
Anybody who's not voted, please cast your ballot right now.
Yes, you can.
Okay, Delmark Benedict votes for Smith as well. Smith as
No,
well.
we were only kidding. Or are you kidding, General Bingham? Can you vote for yourself?
I don't think it's gonna matter if each participant votes for himself.
Okay, and Mr. Holschick, see if we got that proxy there for Mr.
Cahill. Yeah, we do. We have that. We have that on a message.
Okay. All right, so my count right now is 9 Smith. I'm sorry, 8 Smith, 9 LeCedre, 10 Moriarty, and 3 Wirges.
Wow. I thought we had enough of close elections. Wow. It's
So by
become
one
the
vote,
American
I
way.
got Moriarty.
Okay, so Moriarty, LeCedre, and Smith in that order. Congratulations, gentlemen. And thank you to all the competitors for a good effort.
If I may just make it, so it's Moriarty, LeCedre, and Smith in that order. 1, 2, 3.
Correct.
Moriarty,
So
LeCedre,
first prize is $1,000 in cash supplied.
Mor-
Kirlin, the reason McLaughlin was dropped is because he's deployed.
Right.
We briefed that early. Okay, so Moriarty, LeCedre, and Smith in that order. The cash prizes provided by the association are $1,000 for first place, $500 for second place, and $250 for third place. And I think we also give a nominal amount to the other paper writers. Clarify that with the committee chairman and right. So that being just an administrative note, those of you who are collecting, please make sure that you send your mailing address to myself and General Bingham, and we'll make sure that the checks are written out and sent to those addresses. If there's anything different than how the check should be addressed, other than your name, then please let us know when you send us that in.
Such as AUSA, MOA, ROA, USGLC, and even congressional leaders. By attending their meetings and events, and by having active members, our members are also active in these organizations. This helped us develop a symbiotic relationship with them and also helped us exponentially. And the final thing was engaging the decision makers, both the Army, the Marines, active and reserve, DOD. This was done by desk side meetings, outreach programs, our events, our dinners, and attending military events at Fort Bragg. The results of our efforts are mission success. My takeaway as the president, I became a better listener as a result of these programs. I became a learning agent through the meetings, interactive and private organization meetings. I also became a better leader as a result of working with a highly motivated all-star group of people who continually performed above the rim. That's a basketball team. And they went the extra mile. In closing, I'd like to say one thing as far as a quote: price is what you pay, value is what you get. I hope that the value that you receive from us during the time as president here is equal to or greater than the value I received as CAA president. Thank you for your support, and I'll leave you with this CAA Corps slogan. This was coined in 1989 in June when the Corps was activated. Secure the victory. Thank you and Godspeed.